Cool. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us for our talk on selling marketing on the inside. First up, very aware that this is the talk before lunch, so we will keep it short and sweet so that we can all get out and get some food. As mentioned, we are from the marketing agency, or the Revenue First marketing agency, I should say, otherwise Jack will kill me without getting that in. And my name's Luke, this is Sam, and we're kind of as an agency built on the belief that marketing activity should always be brought back into commercial outcomes. And that's what we do with a lot of our clients. Obviously, a lot of the marketing activity is tied back to revenue, and oftentimes they'll come to us and need support in how they're going to report upwards in their organizations. That might come in the form of, we've got an upcoming QBR, an upcoming board meeting, and I want to present back more than just data. So we'll help them storytell around what it is that we've been working on them with, what that means for their business, and what that means for the people that they're going to be speaking to. And that is essentially the inspiration behind our talk today. We felt that if our clients are asking us these questions, then it might be useful information for other people within the industry to understand how you can best go about selling yourselves inside your own company. Now, as we know, as marketers, we're treated a little bit differently to a lot of other departments. We're always continually asked to prove our worth, demonstrate our value, sometimes seen as an expense or an investment for which we need to provide a return. Doesn't tend to happen for HR or for finance departments, for example. And that's where we're going to start our talk today, is just going into a little bit more about that problem and where marketing sits inside a business.
Yeah, exactly. So on the left is a question that I'm sure everyone in the room has been asked at least once. If you haven't, you're probably in the wrong place. What's the ROI on that? How much revenue are we getting back from our campaigns? What's our return on ad spend? On the right is where most marketers tend to live. So you request more budget, you're asked to justify why that's necessary, and then you face pushback, not just from people in your own department, but from people who are essentially competing for the same pot. So as marketers, we're constantly defending what it is we do and why that's important. In a budget meeting, you get asked questions like, how do we know the campaign delivered that revenue? Why are we investing more in brand when we need more leads now? We should be investing more in performance. And the real problem isn't that the work that we do doesn't drive value, it's that people in other departments don't see that value on a day-to-day basis. They can't see how it helps them hit their goals, and therefore it can feel like an unnecessary expenditure. And this leads to marketing being seen as somewhat of a cost center. How can we do more with less rather than how can we do more with more? And the good news is this is fixable, and it doesn't start with doing more. It doesn't start with doing better work. It starts with telling a better story about the work that you're already doing.
So this is how our talk's going to break down into three main sections. We're going to begin with making marketing measurable. We'll go into how it's important to know your audience, and then what you're going to need to be able to create a story that lands. So when it comes to making marketing measurable, this is all about the importance of being able to measure your activity, but also understanding what of those metrics is important and which are less so. Generally, a lot of the metrics will be important for some use cases, but when we're talking about this in this instance, it's all about what we're going to use in those conversations with those senior leadership teams. Knowing your audience is all about having a clear and deep understanding of your stakeholders, what it is that they care about, what are their objectives and their goals so that you can speak their language. And then the story that lands is all around crafting a story with what you're going to present back to them. It's not enough to just have the data and to just understand who you're presenting it to. It's how you present it that's going to give you credibility in that conversation. So, making marketing measurable, you can't tell a compelling story without data. If I didn't record my workout, did it even happen? I'm pretty sure this was a meme, but I couldn't find it, so I just rewrote it. But I'm sure all the smartwatch users in this room have been through this experience where you've been to the gym, you've worked out solidly for 60 minutes and you're sweating on your hands and knees at the end. You've really smashed it, only to realize at the start of the workout, you didn't hit record on your watch. And now that whole workout was a complete waste of time, because I've been there a lot myself. And the same, but what we do know is that it's actually doing the thing that adds value. If you went to the gym every day for the next 6 months and didn't record a single workout, I can guarantee you would still get stronger, you'd still get fitter and healthier. And the same goes for your marketing. The work that you're doing is obviously having impact and it's creating value. And if you did, over the next 6 to 12 months, if you launch new campaigns, run effective marketing, it would deliver value for your business. But the real value is in the measuring of it, of tracking the data, so that you can tell the story to those who need to hear it. If you don't record your workouts, you can't post them on Instagram. And if you don't record your marketing activity, you can't go into board meetings with credibility in the conversation you're about to have.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the measurement trap. So what is the measurement trap? The measurement trap is when we put too much emphasis on measuring metrics with the least impact on business performance, bottom of funnel, revenue, profitability. From my experience, most marketers are inherently still tracking the wrong things, but that's not their fault. It's because the platforms that we use every day make that really easy. The second you start trying to track to revenue, to profitability, that becomes a you problem, and that can be really difficult and daunting. The trap is that these vanity metrics feel like progress because big numbers feel really good, but they're tough to connect to anything meaningful. So impressions don't move the needle on revenue necessarily, or it's not a clean, easy journey in order to explain that. So you can sit in a boardroom and you can say, our latest blog hit 50,000 impressions last month. That's great. The CFO may nod politely, but in their head they're thinking, so what? What does this mean for me, and how can I connect it to my goals and my targets? A good example of that is HubSpot. So HubSpot last year lost 70 to 80% of their blog traffic. Usual culprits, AI overviews, increasing use of LLMs, all the stuff that we hear about every day. Now, if you were purely just measuring on those top of funnel metrics, you'd think that their entire marketing had collapsed. But what actually transpired is their revenue was up 21% in the same period. So blog traffic hugely down, revenue up. And that's the importance of tracking what genuinely matters and measuring what matters versus measuring with vanity metrics. Because if you're just measuring vanity, if you're just measuring that top of funnel, when times get tough and budgets get cut, you'll have no ammunition to defend yourself.
Now, when it comes to marketers, as we all know, there's an abundance of data out there that we could be tracking. And it's hard to understand what's important and which you can leverage for different conversations. And generally, you can categorize these in a hierarchy, as we've laid out here. At the bottom level, we've got outputs. These are generally the very quick and easily accessible metrics that you can get as standardized across platforms. So you can think impressions, clicks, reach. You'll find these in Meta ads, LinkedIn ads, across Google ads. They're very easily accessible, and they're also very quick and direct impacts of your launching a campaign. Next here up, you've got outcomes. So we're getting a bit closer to what's meaningful. We're now talking about how many leads maybe were generated as a B2B business, the quality of those leads, the conversion rates. But we're still not quite there in terms of having data that we can take into a meaningful conversation with senior leadership team. We need to try and hit that top level of business impact. What are the metrics that are going to expand past marketing and actually have an impact on the business goals themselves? We're talking revenue, margins, pipeline, and we can track this. This is what we do with our clients. You can connect the marketing data through to sales and all the way through to the business objectives. You can look at this through a lens of, if I'm going into a conversation where I'm requesting budget or more marketing budget, which of these tiers do I need to take with me in order to get a good answer, get the answer that I want? Going in there with how many clicks you generated isn't going to cut it, and going in there necessarily with how many leads you generated probably also isn't going to cut it. They're not going to want to hear that necessarily. Whilst it's important to us as marketers, maybe at the level of campaign comparisons and seeing how campaigns are performing, it's not what we need to take into a boardroom. And in order to understand what those business impact metrics are for you, you need to understand where your business is focused now and over the next 12 to 18 months. Not every business is focused in the same place. And you might look at these different categories and think that maybe all businesses should be focused on these at all one time. And maybe they are, but it won't be an equal measure. Where your business is focused might depend on a variety of things, the business strategy, internal things, but it also might be external, market conditions, the economy, but it also might be the maturity of that business. If we take a startup, for example, who are looking to grow very quickly, they're likely going to be growth focused. How can we quickly acquire customers, users, at which pace? They're not necessarily caring about how efficiently they're doing it, they just want to do it quickly. On the flip side, if you've got a big company, maybe an industry leader, who are seeing a couple of challenger brands coming through, they might be focused on retention and on brand. They're thinking, how can we keep our customers with us and stop these challenger brands stealing market share? And how can we leverage our brand that we've already established to make leverage on that trust and make sure the customers choose us over these new brands? So the first thing you're going to need to do is understand where your business is focused, look at what metrics are going to allow you to align your marketing performance to that objective, and start making sure that you're measuring those metrics and having impact on those metrics. And once you know that, you're able to go from delivering your marketing activity in a conversation from being output focused to impact focused. You can see at the top, if we've only got metrics that are focused on the output level, we're very much talking about the number of impressions that we're generating, and the clicks and the click-through rates. And then again, that is still valuable to us as marketers, but again, it's just around campaign comparisons and something we might talk about within the marketing team and optimize marketing campaigns. In order to go into the boardroom or to speak to our senior leaders and request more budget, we're going to need something more like the impact-focused message. Here you can see we're talking about leads, but we're laddering up to the pipeline impact, the revenue impact. How are we accelerating the sales cycle? These are the kind of positioning for your marketing activity that are going to make the boardroom sit up and listen to what you've got to say, provides you with credibility, as I say, in that conversation. And again, you can look at it from that perspective of which of these two statements am I going to take with me in order to try and acquire more marketing budget. So now that we know the importance of measuring marketing, how we need to measure it and how we need to focus, we also need to understand who it is that we're talking to.
Exactly right. So marketing 101, know your audience. The key to telling the right story is knowing who you're telling to. If you go in with a specific message and you don't tailor that to different people, different departments, you're going to resonate with no one. So different departments care about different things. That's no secret. From our experience, we've tried to map broadly what different departments care about. And again, this shouldn't feel unfamiliar to people in the room. Sales lead, for example, what do they care about? Lead volume. How many leads am I getting on a regular basis? What's the quality of those leads? Pipeline velocity, how quickly are those moving to sale? The business leads care about something bigger, more expansive. What's our revenue? What's our profitability? How are we growing? But when you look at these data sets, the reality is there's a lot of overlap. You can't report on profitability without reporting on revenue. So it can often feel like we have to bring every data set to the table. We have to bring every data set to a board meeting, when really what really matters is the core fundamentals that you're tracking anyway. Your job isn't to change what it is you measure from your marketing activities. It's to tell the right story based on who's listening at that moment. It's the same set of data with a different frame, different language, and a different emphasis. So let's take a closer look at two examples. What I've done here is I've blown up the finance lead and the business lead on the screen. So finance's job is to look at every pound of marketing budget spent and going, is this efficient? Is this a good use of our money? It can feel very anti-marketing at times because their job is to essentially manage resources. So you need to frame everything around ROI efficiency. How far is our money going? Because that's what they understand. Business lead, again, is thinking bigger. They care about growth, competitive positioning, strategic alignment. So you need to think about the revenue contribution. How far are we along our brand journey? What do we need to do to close the gap on our competitors? Broadly, that's the same data with just a different story. And both perspectives matter. Both stories are important. You just need to make sure you speak both of those languages. And how do you get to know your audience? Again, marketing 101, you speak to them. Find out what they care about. Whenever we pick up a new client, my first job is just to find out what 3 metrics do you want us to report on, because then I know how efficiently and quickly I can show success.
Cool. So that leads us on to the third section of the talk. We now know the importance of measuring marketing, where we need to focus our time, and who we're talking to, and what we need to do in order to make that bespoke conversation depending on who the audience is. But it's not enough to just present the data back to them. We actually need to be able to craft a compelling story. And this is actually where I find a lot of marketers do stumble. They have their data, they know who they're talking to, but they want to present it back in spreadsheets, a set of graphs, sometimes even a very fancy dashboard, which looks great, but they leave a lot of the work up to the audience to understand, well, what does this mean? I can see what we've done and I can see the outcomes of that performance, but what does this mean for us as a business? What's next? What are we going to do about it? That's what they're going to be asking. We see there as being 3 elements to a compelling story: context, data, and implication. The context is all about what you did and why, and here you want to try and get specific. Think about the purpose behind the marketing activity that you ran and what it is you set out to achieve. Next, the data, and this is the facts that prove your impact. So these are going to be the numbers that determine whether the marketing activity that you did run was successful or not. How successful was it? Maybe it wasn't successful, but that's still valuable information because you now understand what not to do. And it will still provide you with credibility in a conversation. But also make sure that that data, as we've said, is relevant to the person that you're talking to. And finally, the implication. What does this mean to the people that you're speaking to? What does this mean for the business? What's next? Are you going in with a budget request? Are you suggesting that you need to change course in how you're running your marketing? Are you going to double down on everything that's working? We need to understand where we're going to go from here.
So there's a difference between a statement and a story. And what we've tried to do here is add a statement which looks back and a statement which looks forward. So 2 different contexts in the boardroom, 2 different asks. We look at the looking back statement. we generated 100 opportunities. You take that to a boardroom, that's great, but there's no context, there's no implication compared to we launched X campaign during Q1 and Q2 to support Y business goal. There's your context. We generated 100 opportunities with 35% conversion rate, reducing average sales cycle by 15 days and adding £250,000 to pipeline. There's your implication. That's what it means. That's the outcome. Looking forward, we'd like 50K for performance marketing next quarter. That's great, wouldn't we all? But there's no trade-off there. Versus with 50K invested in performance marketing next quarter, based on our current conversion rates for 35% and average deal value of 25,000, we can add 375,000 to pipeline and reduce our customer acquisition cost by 20%. Now it's wordy, but you're not asking for budget for the sake of budget here. You're asking them to clearly invest in a specific outcome from marketing. So it's a different story. So next time you go into a QBR, next time you go into a boardroom, use this template to think about how you're going to sell what you're doing and help people see success from the marketing work that you're working on. So step one, context, like Lou said. What did you do and why did you do it? Number two, who are you talking to? Know who's going to be in the boardroom before you go in there. Understand what their priorities are. What do they care about? Not just from a departmental position, but what helps them hit their targets. Then bring your data, but not data for the sake of bringing data. Don't bring impressions if it's not worthwhile. Bring data to service those priorities. Know what they care about and bring the data that matters to them. And then often marketing success gets lost because people just don't understand what these metrics mean. So business implication. What does it mean for them? How does it help them hit their targets? If a sales lead knows that 70% of their inbound leads come from Google ads, they're going to be an advocate for increasing that, putting more budget into that, make it matter to them and their targets. And then number six, what are you proposing? What's the ask? Where do we go from here? What do we need to do next? And there's often a bit of apprehension around forecasting because at times it does feel like blind guesswork, but always bring a forecast if you can, because anything else is just essentially pitching a shot in the dark. So make sure that you make your ask super clear, have data with 50K we can achieve X, and make sure that that benefits everyone who's sitting in the room at the same time.
Cool. So I have no doubt that everyone in this room, you're here and you're doing great marketing, effective marketing that's having a real impact. And as Sam said at the start of the talk, it's not the work itself that is a problem. It's the story that's being told about the work that you're doing with where we're falling down. Whereas if you combine data on the metrics that matter with a deep and clear understanding of the stakeholders and who you're telling it to, along with crafting that skill of storytelling, that's going to be the successful foundation for successfully selling marketing on the inside. Thank you, and we'll take any questions.
That's a clapping you, by the way, not clapping me.
Sam's going to take any questions you've got, if there are any.
What tools would you recommend for tracking attribution?
We use, the CRM's a kind of a cop-out answer, right? But HubSpot is the one that a lot of our clients use, and we find their attribution is mostly right. I think one of the things you have to caveat with attribution is no one's perfect, and if you go chasing perfection, you're going to lose out because there's just no way of attributing a digital lead to someone that's seen, a van with your logo on, for example, or multiple touch points. Like, you can't document every step of the journey. So I often advise clients to just get as close as you can and trust in that data, because if you go chasing perfection, it's a dead mission, really.
Yeah, and I'd also say it depends on the budget that you've got, depending on how much you can afford to invest in different modeling mix, scientific formulas for tracking data. But ultimately, we also like to think that it's not about measurement for owning, it's about influencing. So it's working as a whole. So we're not just trying to track based on what can marketing win and what can marketing own. It's about how we can influence it. So you can do it through HubSpot if you are using a CRM, for example. Obviously, you have the ad platform data. In an ideal world, you would have a data engineer who can build something bespoke and connect all of the different data platforms into one process and kind of transform that data into an output that takes into account all the different platforms and brings it together. If you don't have that capability or that budget, it will take a bit of manual work to assess performance across different platforms. One test which is really simple is simply just turning off something. So if you're running a lot of Google ads and you want to know, is it having an incremental impact, you might need to just turn it off for a couple of months and see, does that change revenue? Does that change brand awareness? Then you'll really understand if it's actually having an impact or not.
And circling back to your question there, I think what converts is another tool that we use. So for clients that don't have a CRM, there aren't that many nowadays, but for clients that don't have a CRM, What Converts works really well as kind of a proxy. So What Converts is essentially an attribution tool that tracks all of your form submissions. It can track calls, basically all inbound leads other than direct email submissions, obviously. But yeah, that's a good one. It shows you kind of paid attribution, organic attribution, direct attribution. So all of your kind of common sources are in there. So one I would recommend.
And not so much a tool, but more an approach. We would definitely recommend, where possible, to do multi-touch attribution. As you will hear from multiple marketing talks, and even earlier in the SEO talk, that around search, there's not a one-stop. It's not a linear route to finding your business and finding your product. By the time someone lands on your site, they've probably touched 5 or 6 different pieces of your content, or they found you out of home advertising. They've seen you on socials. But if you do something like last touch attribution, you might only account that impact to a social channel or to an organic search channel, even though multiple other avenues have influenced that decision. So you might get a bit of a blinded data point if you only focus on last touch.
Cool. Any other questions? Well,
if your business outcome is kind of focused on brand perception, potentially, as opposed to something like growth and sales, what's your kind of suggested way to sort of, link marketing to that in terms of what business outcomes you'd want to be and metrics you'd be looking at?
Might be a better one for
I mean,
you, that.
if you're thinking about brand, obviously there's brand sentiment tools that you can use. Obviously, we mentioned at the start that we're very much trying to connect marketing outcomes to business outcomes and revenue. They're not always direct, so it's not always an instant, we made a sale and therefore we've made revenue. Brand sentiment or brand perception is still important, because ultimately, in the long run, that is going to have an impact on how the business performs. So the metrics would still be, I'd start with maybe something like brand recall, brand awareness, which is slightly different. So we want to look at, do people recognize a brand prompted? Do they recognize it unprompted? Maybe you will serve them a product and see if they associate that product or that pain or that problem with your brand as being able to serve it. You can also then do the brand sentiment studies to see how people feel about your brand. There are tools out there that will measure human emotion in response to your activity. So usually you can do it through an advert, a video, and a tool can measure the human response and emotion to that. So there's plenty of metrics out there. It's just about, in the storytelling part, is connecting why strong brand sentiment would be, or a strong brand awareness ladders down to the revenue goals that you're connected to. So it's to try, that becomes more of a storytelling part of connecting the dots there.
Hi.
Hi.
How would you tell the story of marketing to editorial and content teams? So almost setting the pace for marketing activity, and also if you wanted to change the content strategy on marketing channels, how would you take them on that journey?
I think you need to bring them into their role in that journey, because I think what people want to feel is that they're making a big contribution and that their contribution is important. So don't hide anything from them in terms of the reasoning behind why that change is happening or what you need from that team. Let them know that this new approach is going to lead to X outcome, or that's what we expect it to do. And it's really, their role in that is critical. If they're the ones producing the content and that content strategy is going to position the brand in a certain way, it's all about marketing. Let them know about the marketing communication side of it. Their words and their written content is literally representing the brand in the outside world. So it is significant impact. I think just bring them along, like make them feel important, make them feel that what they're going to be doing is significant for the business, and just show them what we're trying to drive towards. So I think that shared value and that shared work towards a single goal is what kind of brings the teams together.
I'm going to kind of start with a scenario and then let you get into it.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Say that you're like the sole marketer on a team, and they've brought you in as sort of like the first sole, like you're the first person whose sole job has been to focus on marketing, which means that their perception is very much that you're in charge of the outcomes. The only thing that you currently have access to is data on the outcome. How would you approach the rest of the team, such as like an operations manager, to ask them to go through your other data sources, for example? So if you need to see a CRM to kind of track where people have come in from, how do you persuade them to start tracking sort of, we need to understand where our traffic is coming from, to then make a more solid marketing plan? Where would you kind of start with that?
I think that goes back to kind of what I spoke about around understanding their priorities and showing how marketing can kind of tie into their goals. So make it real for them, not from a, you need to track that so you can kind of prove the value of the work you're doing, right? That's no secret. I think it's more understand how that can influence their targets and show them more about the work that you're doing. So for finance, for example, they're investing in this initiative. They're investing in you to run the marketing campaigns. So they're going to want to see a return on investment. They're going to want to see a return on effort there. And if you can try to translate that, by tracking where leads are coming from, by tracking our website users, we can get a clearer picture of actually how much return we're getting from that. I think then it becomes very real to them. So it's very tempting to kind of see marketing as we have all of these metrics and this is what I report on, but really you have to connect the dots between how do I make this relevant to the actual person that's going to be giving me sign off, giving me budget. So that's where I would start, speak to them, find out what they care about and understand how you can connect the dots between what you're doing, what you need to track and what that will mean for them. Any other questions? Mr. Kennedy.
What do you do when someone's invested a lot in their marketing, but obviously sometimes sales cycles are slightly longer, so the revenue's not come yet? How do you have those conversations where you can't talk to revenue yet because it's not come, but you know it's coming? How do you handle that challenge?
I think then it's looking at the metrics that are more leading indicators. So it's understanding what is suggesting that the revenue is going to come. So that's where you might pull back a little bit into that hierarchy that we had. You might end up looking at the outcomes data. Say, look, we've got all of the leads coming in. Our conversion rates are X, Y, Z. So given how many leads we've got, we expect this number of opportunities. Knowing our average deal value means that each of those opportunities is worth 20,000. And we expect that, we know that our sales cycle is 3 to 6 months. So at the end of that period, we would expect 20% of those to turn into this amount of money. So you have to do a bit of forecasting, a bit of scenario planning. And in that first instance, it will take a bit of faith in that proposal. But once you've doing this a third, fourth, fifth time, you will have historic data to prove we did the scenario planning. This is what the actual outcome was. So we were on track and we were right. So they'll start believing in your proposal a bit more. So you have to do a bit more storytelling around that. But you will still have data that can back you up.
Any other questions, guys?
Do you have any advice if you were in a scenario where perhaps you were working with a client who was actually maybe struggling to really kind of articulate or determine what their business outcome goal was? And how do you kind of work with them to kind of tease that out?
So when you say struggling to understand what as in they're investing in marketing, but they're not sure what success looks like?
Yeah, so
okay.
I'll give you the context.
Yeah.
Higher education marketing team.
Yes.
They're not quite sure what the sort of outcome focus is. How would you work with them to kind of, tease that out?
I think and again, the best place to start would be, what asking the question of what does success look like? Like if we invest X amount, like what do we want back from that? Like that's how I start those conversations with any new client is, what are the 3 things that deem this as a successful initiative? In this situation, have you asked that question and they don't have an answer for that? Is that kind of where the land lies at the moment?
Yes, it's
okay.
kind of, when we're asking what's the point,
yeah.
We're not really getting an answer to that question.
Yeah. I think in that case, you can generally just bring it back to why do we exist as a business? Like, what are we here to do? If we don't know what we're doing as a business and what we're here to exist for, why are we a business? That's the kind of the core question you can answer. And if it's a business here to make profit, whether it's higher education or whether it's private sector, if there's profit and revenue as an objective, that's where we would generally start. Because I say we want to get back to commercial outcomes. If marketing is going to be an investment, it needs to see a return, and it's normally going to need to influence the revenue. If it's not so focused on the revenue right now, probably one of those categories, it might have been more of a growth focus or a retention focus, for example. It just takes a bit of question and answer. But the root is, why do we exist? I think we're starting it with that root of why we exist as a business. Why was the business set up to achieve from the first place? And are we still on track for that kind of same value and that same objective?
And I think looking on the other side and thinking, well, what would it look like if we hadn't done any marketing? What would be different? And that's a good way of kind of thinking about, well, if we hadn't done this, we wouldn't have achieved, if we hadn't done X, we wouldn't have achieved Y. So almost flip the script a little bit and think about, we may not know what we're trying to do with marketing or what the outcome needs to be, but if we hadn't done marketing up to now, how would things look? And then it can kind of frame it around, well, what are the pros, what are the cons, and what do we need to do more of, where are our gaps, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Cool.
What advice do you have around telling the story about marketing to a C-suite, senior management team that just don't get the language of marketing. If you said the word lead generation, they'd be like, because like I work in B2B, and our client base is our staff are our product really, because they're consultants, and we don't have a CRM. Client relations is chaotic at best. We're thriving.
Surviving.
But like marketing is not baked into their thinking. The language around marketing isn't baked into their thinking. They wouldn't understand what good looked like as well. So if you said, a percentage of, I don't know, open rates or conversions, they'd be like, well, is that good or bad? I've got no idea. So where would you start if like actually your storytelling has to be quite basic?
Yeah, for sure.
Convincing them of the importance of marketing.
Yeah, and I think even before you get into that, there might be a need for an educational piece on why, if you don't really understand the language of marketing, why do we have a marketing department in the first place? Like, we're here to educate you. So you might just need to do a bit of education of how marketing impacts a wider business. It's not just a department in itself. It is going to have an impact on them. And if they're not really caring about those metrics of open rates, which are probably more those kind of output ones that we mentioned, what is it that they do care about? They might think, okay, we're talking, they care about the revenue numbers. You can just scrap all the detail. And if you have the data and you can say marketing influenced X amount of revenue, just start there and let them dig into it. They might go, okay, you're telling us you contributed 20% of the revenue. How did you do that? And then you can start telling them how you did it. They might get a little bit lost on the way. They might need a little bit of hand-holding, but let them start asking the questions so that you can give them the finer detail. Don't start with the detail that might lose them up front and then try and work your way up to the revenue. Start with what they care about and then try and go backwards and say, we contributed this much, but the way we were able to do that is because we have this marketing team doing X, Y, and Z, and we're sending out these sorts of campaigns, and they might then start to understand how it all ladders up to what they care about.
Yeah, I think sometimes bringing metrics like open rates to those sort of meetings, it's like bringing a wooden spoon to a gunfight sometimes, or a shootout, sorry. But I think you, everyone understands the language of money. People understand revenue. Like, put it in context of their terms, what they understand, and you should have an easier time. As I said, a lot of the kind of top of funnel metrics feel really important to you, but they don't translate to anything meaningful in the boardroom, and sometimes they're just not necessary. So, as I say, everyone understands revenue, everyone understands profitability, which is why it's so important that you track down to that level. Hey.
Do you think there's ever a case of highlighting opportunity cost, as in if you don't invest?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I was going to raise this point earlier. Like, there's two ways to go about it. There's here's the great outcome that could happen, the kind of positive, proactive approach, but there's also the fear-mongering approach of, well, just imagine you don't give us marketing budget and this is what the future is going to look like because competitors are spending, they're going to maybe outspending us, or we're not investing here or there. You can take that approach. It does come back to understanding your audience and how you think they're going to respond to different types of message. Understand their personality, understand their triggers to see. You might go in with that approach and they might just react badly to it because they can see through the fact that you're just trying to scare them. But then other people might react really well to it. So I think understand your audience and do what you need to do. Position it how you think they're going to best respond.
Hey.
So obviously things like open rates, things that, in the marketing team, we talk about that quite a lot, which is really important. It helps us judge what good looks like for our team.
Of course.
How do you go about modelling that up then to revenue? So, for the business we work in, we might do a lot of brand awareness campaigns, which is great, but attributing that one final lead or business that moves into one of our spaces might not be anything to do with the brand awareness campaign that we've done. So how do we model that kind of
how do you show the kind of attribution?
That could result in that. So it could be that one example, but is it based on set frameworks or guidelines or models?
Yeah, I think, are you using a CRM? Are you tracking kind of attribution, that kind of stuff? I think that's the starting point. Make sure that your attribution is clean, not just for new customers, but for repeat purchases as well. So obviously, if you're emailing to a database, likely chances that they've engaged with you at some point along that journey anyway. So definitely having multi-touch, clear attribution sorted. So in my eyes, it's less about connecting the dots between open rate and revenue that you've bought from that, but more channel than revenue that you've bought from that. So you can kind of monitor those trends in, we sent this email out to this audience at this time and we generated this amount of revenue from that send. That's how we've traditionally done it. But equally, you know, if you're arming yourself with the data and open rate and you can see that you've generated more revenue because more people have opened the email, which is pretty basic, pretty much what I would expect, you know, you've kind of got a compelling case there to make that story because you can connect the dots between the two. So I think it really goes back to having clean tracking, having a good CRM set up, being able to integrate, I don't know if you're using a MailChimp or a Bravo or something like that, integrate that with your CRM data and be able to paint a really clear picture of this person opened this email and then they bought a product worth £20 and then being able to funnel that into a dashboard that you can kind of see those peaks and troughs over time. Anything you want to add to that, Luke?
No, I think you're right. Yes, it's about having that multi-touch attribution, I think, because as you mentioned, it's not so much the open rate that you're going to try and connect to revenue, it's the fact that the channel of email marketing is delivering a certain volume of customers over a certain period of time. And again, if you have that multi-touch, you're going to also be able to see where where email marketing fits within that journey. I've seen it with our clients where in HubSpot, obviously you have the history of that user within the system. And we've seen it where this, you know, contacts are being sent emails after emails, different content, they've engaged with socials, and then there's one email that goes out that they open and click, and within a week they've bought from, we don't necessarily attribute it to that single email because we would also say that everything they've done up until that point has contributed. So it's just having a bit of that history. So I'd say it's more about the channel connected to the revenue versus, because what ultimately you're going to try and do then is understand each channel's contribution to the revenue, and that's going to inform how you split your budget across those channels going forward, or request more budget for a particular channel. Open rates are still an important metric as marketers, because as Sam mentioned, like the more the email is contributing to the revenue, you can easily correlate that the more opens, the more likelihood you're going to get more customers from that. So it's more at a channel level.
Yeah, and I'd agree. What we're not saying here is that top of funnel metrics don't matter. They do matter, but with context and in the right places. So for a marketing team, tracking your open rate, tracking your impressions is super important because then you understand what your growth levers are and how they funnel down to revenue. But when you're entering a QBR, when you're with kind of senior stakeholders who don't necessarily understand that side of the coin, that's when you need to kind of pick and choose the metrics because you can't bring all the data to the table. But absolutely, when you're deciding strategy, when you're deciding kind of campaign blueprints, where you want to go, open rate, impressions, they're all really valuable in that context. So, any other questions, guys? Cool. So we're on for an earlier lunch then.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool.